This morning, I'm very excited and extremely grateful to spend some time with Henry Moran of ASC Associates in the UK. Henry is a logistics, transport, and global security supply chain consultant. His particular expertise is in the life science industry, where he is one of the foremost authorities on good distribution practices. Thank you so much for joining me today, Henry.
It's a pleasure, Eric. I'm honored to be here.
Starting off, can you tell me about ASC Associates and what specific role you serve in the company?
Sure, absolutely. So ASC Associates are a bespoke consultancy organization, and we do three things. Keep it all really nice and simple. We provide advisory services to the pharmaceutical and pharmaceutical logistics industries. We provide training services, again, very similar to those types of stakeholders. So the pharmaceutical industry, the freight forwarding industry, truckers, airlines, any transportation node, any transportation mode in the supply chain. And the final element of what we do is obviously performing audits, typically, again, on behalf of the pharmaceutical shippers themselves. And when we talk about auditing, we focus on two key things. One is good distribution practice, which is exactly what we're going to be talking a little bit about today. And the second thing is around supply chain security. So we work, I guess, with our clients in a very flexible partnership approach, where we ultimately become as an extended part of their team, and that's how we do things. Yeah.
Interesting. So, what is your core customer base?
Yeah. So we're kind of focusing very much around organizations that are involved in the pharmaceutical industry, and I use that term somewhat broadly. I think I also mean the life science and healthcare industries. I think sometimes we get a little bit too focused on pharmaceuticals. So that is very much a core client of ours. Again, all those organizations involved in either transporting or distributing medicines for human use. And then those organizations, I would say, at the coalface of transportation. So trucking companies, airlines, shipping lines, ocean carriers, and then perhaps also working with the infrastructural organizations, so port authorities or airports, about how they build infrastructure and how we ensure that they and help them in working in a GDP compliant way. So that's pretty much who we focus all of our energy and our resources on.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your personal experience and your background. How did you get to be one of the foremost authorities on GDP?
Oh, man. I was only laughing yesterday with my family. When I left school, I wanted to become a truck driver. So that's perhaps where the seed of logistics and transportation came from. I've been working in this industry, and I use that quite broadly, maybe for the last sort of 25 plus years. I started my career in the high-tech industry, following graduating from University College Dublin with a master's degree in business studies, specializing in manufacturing and logistics. And then for the last sort of 18 years or so, very focused around the life sciences industries. So I spent a number of years working for a pharmaceutical manufacturer, Mundipharma. And then the last 7 or so years, I think it is now, with ASC Associates. So taking my experiences from the industry, the high-tech, high-value, highly sensitive cargo industry, converting that into providing this expertise around supply chain security, around good distribution practice. So it's been one hell of a great ride. And every day is very different, and I think that's what's I'm enjoying with the role that I have at the moment with ASC Associates. We're dealing with so many different clients, many different projects, really exciting challenges, and it allows me to kind of bring all of that together, and then bring all that information back to our customer base and to industry-led organizations.
Great. Your perspective on GDP, that explains a lot, because you're really coming from the logistics side, looking in rather than looking out, which is where some of the issues that I see on understanding the GDP come from. I think that's interesting. So yeah, what would you say the origin of GDP is, and what's the relevance of it within the life science industry?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think from a pharmaceutical and healthcare and life science industries, when you work in that industry or you work with that industry, it's all about regulation, right? It's all about quality compliance. So thinking about the principles of good manufacturing practice, GMP, I think the industry is very familiar with those requirements. It's a quality standard, a quality level that every organization that's manufacturing a drug for human use has to comply with, ultimately to ensure patient safety. That's really what it's about. So I think kind of following, certainly here in Europe, and I think once Europe started to move on GDP, a lot of other countries did very similar type things. Once we began to realize that the risk was moving not necessarily within the manufacturing process, but in fact, because products and markets were becoming much more complex, the supply chain was seen as an area of high risk. So the idea was to bring that similar type quality warranty system to the distribution element of pharmaceuticals and healthcare products. Now, primarily, GDP is there to regulate organizations that are involved in buying and selling medicines. So organizations that are involved in wholesale distribution activities. So what we're ultimately doing is taking that level of incredibly high standard of compliance and then working with those transportation providers to increase their knowledge and their levels of compliance, so that ultimately we all ensure patient safety.
Yeah, what's obvious to me in your responses is when you refer to GDP, you very shortly thereafter reference quality, and that's of extreme interest and importance. And so, with that, what are the basic tenets of GDP? What does it consist of when we talk about it?
Absolutely. So it's all about quality management, and we talk extensively to clients, almost every day of the week around having a quality management system. So GDP ensures, good distribution practice ensures the proper distribution of medicinal products for human use. So that's what it is. It's about, once a product is manufactured at a particular site, all the way through that supply chain to the point that that drug is ultimately prescribed or taken by the patient. So this quality warranty system very much guaranteeing the integrity, the quality, and the efficacy of that particular drug. So if you think about a guideline or a regulation to work towards, if we meet that guideline and we fulfill that level of compliance, then we are reducing the risk to the patient, from a quality point of view.
Yeah, and you also referenced the relationship between GDP and GMP. And I think when we talk to most folks in the industry, they're very familiar with GMP. I think they can go to a guideline or a book and they can really pull something out and follow it to see whether they comply or not. Is that the same for GDP? And how can companies become formally or officially certified in GDP, or is there an avenue for that?
So there are two models in operation, Eric, here. One is where an organization that's involved in wholesale activities, as we said, buying and selling medicines for human use, they, as a result of performing that activity, are usually officially licensed by the competent authority, so the regulator. In the US's case, the FDA, in our case here in the UK, the MHRA. So they go in, they inspect these organizations, they make sure that they're adhering to the GDP guidelines and requirements, and they issue them a license. Very, very similar, like you've alluded to, from a GMP point of view. So whereby an organization that wants to manufacture a particular drug has to convince and show the regulator that they have all of the processes and systems in place to meet the GMP regulations. So we've got that one level. But what we also have is a second level, which are those organizations that are not buying and selling medicines, but ultimately they are still involved in the pharmaceutical supply chain. So in that case, the value of being GDP certified or GDP accredited by an external organization is assuring that service provider that, based on an external view, they also meet the GDP regulations and GDP requirements. So a very similar process. We would typically go in, assess an organization's processes and procedures and its people with respect to guideline, and then assuming they meet that criteria, they would ultimately then be certified for a period of time. So those are the two levels that are in operation when we talk about GDP certification or GDP licensing.
And so companies that are interested in this and want to meet and know they have to meet their regulatory requirement for compliance, where would they go to access GDP requirements, procedures, and protocols? Is there a specific document, a guideline, or a manual in the industry? Where would a company go to understand what the parameters of that compliance would be for GDP?
Yeah, so again, we're typically working with two regulations. One is the EU GDP guidelines, revised in 2013, providing a framework and a structure as to what should be involved from a GDP compliant point of view. And the second regulation standard is the World Health Organization and their guidelines on good distribution practice. So if an organization is interested in getting to that level, those are really the two key reference points that any organization should look at and understand in order to be able to understand what meeting that criteria is ultimately all about.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so what is the overall benefit that a manufacturer or a service provider would gain from being certified or trained in GDP?
Yeah, so it's an assurance, isn't it? So certainly from a manufacturing point of view, very much as part of GMP regulations, and GDP is a part of that. So it's not very often that we would ultimately see a manufacturer become GDP certified. The GMP element covers that bit of it. But certainly from a GDP point of view, it's about assuring the manufacturer of that product that if we know that our service providers, and let's be honest, and you know this in what you guys do and what you folks do, our industry is all about outsourcing, right? Everything that we do, we outsource. So the pharmaceutical and healthcare manufacturers are outsourcing the transportation and logistics to third-party organizations. They have to feel assured that those organizations are also working in a compliant way. They're only responsible for the manufacturing part. They are handing their products over to organizations that are involved in the transportation or distribution or storage element of it. So they want to understand and they want to know that with and when they need to work with those types of organizations, that they are compliant, because then they can feel, from a risk perspective, they feel much more comfortable that their products are being handled in the appropriate way. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so I've heard you refer to regulations and compliance, and that usually makes folks kind of stop and get a little weary. But is GDP a certification or compliance a regulatory requirement?
Yeah, that's it. That's a great question. Not usually. So the certification element, no. The licensing point of view, absolutely yes. So back to that point about wholesale distribution. I guess the difficulty that we have from a GDP point of view, Eric, is that there is no one global set of guidelines that we can all follow. So there are different countries have their own set of regulations from a wholesale distribution point of view. So it can make it quite complex, which is the reason, as I've said, that the EU GDP guidelines and the World Health Organization guidelines are being used as the standard, as that global standard. But I have to be honest and clear. Guidelines can change country by country, and that's perfectly acceptable. But there is very much a common theme that runs all the way through each of the respective countries' GDP guidelines.
And so that would be incumbent upon each of those companies that are responsible for maintaining quality, that run a global supply chain, to understand what those differences are in the requirements or the guidelines. And that's the onus is on them to know that.
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very much so. So if you think about the challenge between the US and Europe, a lot could be said that the US hasn't necessarily embraced all elements of good distribution practice. So the challenge for a manufacturer in the US that's producing pharmaceutical or healthcare products, they need to ensure that they're complying with EU GDP requirements if they are indeed exporting their product, if they're exporting their product to the European Union, or perhaps to other global customers. And likewise, the same is said from the reverse. If I'm an EU based or an Asian based manufacturer and I am exporting my product into the US, I have to comply with my national requirement, but I should absolutely be aware of what the international requirement is as well. So it's very complex in that way, and it puts a significant onus on all of the stakeholders to make sure that they are aware of the different regulations. Definitely. Yeah,
it's all part of a risk management process, looking at the entire picture. And so how are regulators enforcing compliance with GDP, or are they enforcing compliance with GDP?
Certainly from a licensing perspective, yes. So as a wholesale distributor, no matter where you are in the world, if you have a license from your competent authority, they are typically going to be inspecting you. Maybe, well, they will ultimately end up taking a risk-based approach. So depending on the activities that you're performing, they will typically inspect you for compliance maybe once, maybe every 2 years, maybe once every 3 years. So that's how they regulate. That's how they regulate the licensing when it comes to wholesale distribution. When it comes to GDP certification, we're probably talking that same cycle. So an external accredited organization to come in and reaffirm itself or reconfirm to itself that this organization that we certified 2 years ago is in fact still operating to the right levels of compliance. And then as a result of ensuring that everything is in place from a process systems perspective, procedural perspective, then reissuing the certificate for a further 2 years. So yeah, it's all about constantly ensuring that these organizations meet the required standards. It isn't just a one-off. Once I have my license or once I have my certificate, I don't have to worry about it anymore. That is definitely not the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I see that from my involvement. I see overall it being somewhat subjective in nature, and I don't see any harmonized approach to when we talk about things like compliance. So I very much relate to what you're talking about. So from your point of view, what are some of the misconceptions that you come across that companies have in regards to GDP?
I think there's always an element of, well, it's got nothing to do with me. I'm only a trucker. I'm only a freight forwarder. I don't ever get to see this product. All I do is I just perform customs brokerage. So the misconception is that any activity, and the World Health Organization define this really well. They say that any activity involved in the pharmaceutical supply chain, and I use that term very broadly, has to be compliant, has to be working to the relevant regulation. So that's a really big misconception in regards to the industry. And I guess maybe not a misconception. I guess organizations sometimes forget that you either do this or you don't. Eric, you'll know this. You either invest in the program or you don't. You as an organization, you can't just dip your toe in and think that everything is going to be okay. It takes a huge amount of management commitment to get the program implemented into organizations. But you know what? Once you do it, then you're very much seen in the industry as an organization that complies. So, you typically find, certainly there are many more benefits of commercial opportunity. So yeah, the misconception is this is an easy thing to do. It isn't. It's absolutely, it gets done, but it's a challenge, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of resource to make it happen and do it properly.
Yeah, indeed. So with that said, where do you see the future within the life science industry as it relates to GDP?
It's all about compliance. It really is. We want every single organization involved in the supply chain to be working to that required standard. It's all about ensuring patient safety. So we know that the pharmaceutical industry and the technology is changing significantly. Supply chains becoming much more complex. Product being manufactured in one country, raw materials being imported from another. finished goods and semi-finished goods being moved from one continent to another. So there's significant complexity around the supply chain nowadays. Aside from this, amazing technologies of sort of personalized medicines and CAR-T technology. So really, from our perspective, it's all about compliance and patient safety. So being part of a program, being part of an accredited program, will and does provide evidence to manufacturers that ultimately the right levels are being met.
Mm. And so I know you're working with the Pharmaceutical Cargo Security Coalition, the PCSC, and recently you shared with me some exciting news that you're working alongside Chuck Forsyth, who heads up that organization, on the development of a GDP accreditation program. That to me is extremely exciting, because all of the things that you've talked about today, how it's applied in the industry, and some of the misconceptions and misunderstandings are really prevalent. And I think to hear that someone with your stature and your qualifications and experience have identified this to provide a program which companies can sign up for and become certified and standardize this process, I think is incredibly exciting. How much can you share with us about the development and the timeline for launch of that type of accreditation program?
So at the moment, it's a really exciting program, and I think we're looking at it in partnership with the PCSC, really from two key elements here. One is the practical application of good distribution practice to the industry, and by that we mean all elements of the industry. So it goes down to owner operators, truckers, forwarders, third-party logistics providers. So for us, it's about bringing that element of GDP compliance, but we also, I guess, want to bring an element of supply chain security into this too. And I think sometimes within our industry, we think pharmaceutical distribution, we think temperature management. Oh, as long as we manage the temperature, then everything is great. But in fact, one of the other most significant risks is theft and counterfeit and falsification. So by bringing both of those two elements of expertise together, that's where the value of the program is ultimately going to bring the organizations that become part of that program. We're hoping to be in a position sort of early Q3 where the program will be launched, and we'll be able to have discussions with organizations that want to become part of the program. And I guess the other value is, Eric, we've been there, sort of at an individual level and at a company level. And the fact is that we will also not only want to bring our level of compliance knowledge, but also how do we practically apply this to our organization? And sometimes I think, we kind of assume that organizations kind of know what they're doing, but we want to be there with them, and we want to guide them, and we want to support them, so that we can bring them through the whole accreditation process from beginning to end. And then they ultimately then become recognized as a best-in-class organization. So it's really exciting, and the value that we'll bring to the industry. It goes back to your point about what does a shipper feel. A shipper wants a warranty system, a quality warranty system. So that's what the accreditation program is going to do.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the hole that we have in the industry as far as GDP is that practical application. It's a tough concept to understand, and the whole idea of the subjectivity of it is difficult for companies to say, yes, of course I want to maintain quality, but how do I do that? I think this is a perfect tool to give them an opportunity, and not just from the manufacturers or the product license holder, but the logistics and transportation service providers. It gives them a game plan and a roadmap. The other thing that you said is absolutely spot on, is GDP has almost been kind of advanced and talked about from the manufacturing side, which is why I think temperature is mostly in focus on that. And your association with the PCSC that talks about supply chain security is so important, because as part of any quality management system, yes, quality consists of protecting the integrity of the product as well, which, as we all know, has to do a lot with security. So this has been wonderful. Right. This has been wonderful. Please, Henry, as you get more information about this accreditation program, I hope you'll find time to come back and sit with me and kind of talk to me about it. I am personally interested, as I know some of the listeners will be very, very interested to know that this initiative is out there.
Brilliant, Eric. Absolutely, we'd be delighted, as you well know, and having an advocate in you and your organization from an insurance perspective is critical again to the success of this program. We want to involve everybody, and I think that's the key here. And again, we sometimes forget different organizations that perhaps sit slightly outside of the day-to-day activity. And an organization like Falvey, you're right in the middle of it. You've got so much value to give the program and to give the participants in the program. We're absolutely embracing the challenge, and we so much appreciate your support. It's really great.
Well, it's mutual, and the future looks bright. So I appreciate your time today, Henry.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. I always feed off your energy and enthusiasm. So always enjoy spending time with you. Look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity. I really appreciate it, Eric.
All right, Henry. We'll talk to you later.